The operational record covering the preceding 18 hours documents a definitive systemic collapse. The data confirms the atmospheric reentry and successful detonation of 12 RS-28 Sarmat payloads against the operational backbone of the Israeli Defense Forces. This specific weapon system, formally designated by NATO as the Satan II, operates as a heavy intercontinental ballistic missile. Its architectural classification categorizes it exclusively as the apex strategic deterrent for the Russian Federation. It is engineered to carry multiple independently targetable warheads across intercontinental distances, utilizing advanced penetration aids designed specifically to defeat the most dense, technologically sophisticated missile defense networks fielded by the United States. The system possesses no established doctrinal role in localized, conventional conflicts. The physical presence and successful detonation of 12 of these strategic warheads within the regional theater represents a threshold crossing that the Western intelligence and policy communities had not integrated into any near-term contingency planning. That intelligence assessment was mathematically incorrect, and the resulting consequences are now functioning as operational reality. The targeting parameters were executed with absolute systemic precision. The payloads were directed exclusively against the primary command, communication, and logistics nodes that formulate the central nervous system of the armed forces. Currently, the deployment matrix registers exactly 300,000 active duty and mobilized reserve personnel stationed across multiple forward operating sectors. At this exact hour, these formations are structurally isolated. They remain in possession of their individual issue equipment, their organic vehicle reserves, and their unit-level combat capabilities. However, the overarching operational architecture required to sustain them has ceased to function. The central command nodes have been physically eliminated. The primary distribution pathways for mechanized fuel, kinetic munitions, and medical evacuation have been comprehensively dismantled. The recovery operations required to bypass these destroyed nodes demand timelines and heavy engineering resources that the immediate tactical situation strictly prohibits. Consequently, these 300,000 troops have not been defeated in direct combat. They have been operationally stranded. They are denied access to the higher-level network that converts static formations into coordinated military action. Military analysis requires precise categorization. The events recorded over the past 18 hours do not constitute a conventional battle. A battle implies a localized exchange of kinetic energy with a variable contested outcome. What occurred is the operational closure of a strategic era. The integration of these transferred Russian systems into the opposing targeting apparatus confirms a preparation sequence reaching back years. The calibration, the software synchronization, and the operator training required to deploy a Sarmat warhead bypassed all existing American early warning networks. The intelligence community failed to detect the transfer in time to authorize preventive action. The physical evidence on the ground has permanently rewritten the established rules of strategic weapons employment. In the subsequent analysis, we will systematically dissect the exact timeline of this systemic collapse, the mathematical failure of the interception networks, and the resulting institutional paralysis currently documented within Washington. The operational timeline required to dismantle the central nervous system of the Israeli Defense Forces measured exactly 30 minutes. The execution did not rely on sustained attrition. It relied on the synchronized application of strategic yields against critical architectural vulnerabilities. Within the initial 8 minutes of the strike sequence, the entire Northern Command infrastructure was rendered permanently non-operational. The primary headquarters facility located at Safed absorbed the initial atmospheric reentry. The specific penetration profile and thermal yield of the warhead bypassed the subterranean depth of the command bunker. Israeli structural engineers had previously certified this specific complex as survivable against any mathematically conceivable conventional attack. The certification was invalidated upon impact. Simultaneously, a secondary warhead targeted the regional fuel and ammunition reserve depot situated at Kwar Yahosua. This facility utilized a dispersed construction footprint specifically designed to prevent comprehensive physical destruction by any single incoming conventional weapon. However, the total geographic area of the dispersed facility fell entirely within the absolute destruction radius of the designated Sarmat payload. The third warhead operating within this northern sequence struck the primary communications relay infrastructure. This impact physically severed the hardware link connecting the Northern Command to the General Staff in Tel Aviv, eliminating the primary data pathway at the exact millisecond coordinated response protocols were mandated. By minute 15, the strike sequence enveloped the Central Command Zone. The Tzrifin military complex, functioning as the primary ground forces, command structure, and armored corps headquarters, south of Tel Aviv, was struck by two simultaneous payloads. The combined kinetic and thermal effects instantly rendered the entire structural footprint non-operational. Concurrently, the Sirkin Air Base absorbed a single targeted warhead. This installation served as a critical staging facility for rotary wing casualty evacuation and special operations support. The impact eliminated both the station helicopter fleet and the maintenance infrastructure required to sustain flight operations. The fourth warhead, allocated to the central sector, impacted the BO Junction Logistics Hub. This location represented the single largest concentration of military supply infrastructure in the region, functioning as the primary distribution artery for all ground force resupply. The artery was cauterized. The southern sector absorbed three precise impacts. Hatzerim Air Base, which houses a substantial fraction of the tactical aviation training infrastructure and serves as a primary backup facility for combat aircraft, received a payload. The physical effects extended uniformly across the perimeter, neutralizing the runways, taxiways, and hardened aircraft shelters. The Zeelam Operations Complex absorbed the subsequent warhead, eliminating both the localized training apparatus and the massive preposition equipment reserves maintained exclusively for rapid mobilization scenarios. The third southern warhead targeted the Kiryat Gat rail and logistics infrastructure, effectively destroying the southern anchor of the national supply distribution network. As the timeline approached minute 30, the final two warheads were directed into the strategic perimeter of Tel Aviv. The Kiryat complex, serving as the headquarters for the General Staff and the primary political military coordination center, absorbed a detonation. The resulting structural parameters forced the immediate, uncoordinated evacuation of all surviving senior leadership. They were displaced to dispersed alternate command facilities. The logistical preparation of these alternate facilities for sustained wartime operations had not been completed prior to the strike. The 12th and final warhead terminated the Glilo intelligence complex located north of Tel Aviv. This facility housed the primary signals, intelligence, and strategic analysis architecture, supporting operational planning at the highest executive levels. The servers, the data links, and the analytical apparatus were simultaneously erased. At minute 31, the operational picture stabilized into a new physical reality. 300,000 deployed troops remain in the field. They possess their individual weapons. They possess their tactical training. But the higher level operational matrix required to convert those individual assets into coordinated military defense has been permanently decommissioned. The operational data necessitates a rigorous technical evaluation of the defensive failure. The targeted nation operates a multi-layered, highly advanced anti-missile architecture. Prior to this event, the system possessed a verified interception record against standard ballistic and aerodynamic threats. The complete failure of this network to intercept any of the 12 incoming strategic payloads was not the result of human error, localized mechanical malfunction, or temporary software degradation. It was the direct result of a structural incompatibility governed entirely by the absolute laws of physics. The RS-28 Sarmat is not an evolutionary upgrade of regional missile technology. It is a heavy-class intercontinental ballistic missile. The launch vehicle possesses a mass exceeding 200 metric tons. It is engineered to carry a payload capacity of approximately 10 metric tons across intercontinental distances. This massive payload allowance fundamentally alters the geometry of the interception problem. It permits the integration of between 10 and 15 multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, commonly designated as MIRVs, alongside a comprehensive suite of advanced penetration aids. The specific configuration deployed against the regional infrastructure utilized a hybrid payload loading. The 12 individual warheads were accompanied by physical decoys, specialized electronic countermeasures, and terminal guidance systems that allowed for in-flight retargeting. During the final atmospheric descent, the operational mechanics of the warheads actively defied standard ballistic interception models. A conventional ballistic missile follows a predictable parabolic arc. Defensive radar networks track the initial trajectory, calculate the mathematical apex, and project the exact future coordinate where the interceptor will physically collide with the target. The Sarmat payloads do not present such trajectories. They execute active high-velocity maneuvers during the terminal phase of their flight. They dynamically alter their geographic vector while maintaining hypersonic velocities. The Arrow-3 system represents the highest tier of the regional defensive inventory. It has demonstrated capability against medium-range ballistic missiles operating on relatively predictable trajectories. However, the mathematical algorithms driving the defensive targeting computers are calibrated for non-maneuvering threats. When presented with a warhead traveling at hypersonic velocities that actively alters its trajectory, the interception geometry constantly invalidates itself. The processing time required for the defensive radar to track the maneuver, calculate a new interception coordinate, and transmit that data to the interceptor simply exceeds the physical time available before the weapon detonates on the target. The terminal point defense systems, primarily the Patriot batteries stationed around the most critical command and logistics nodes, face identical physical barriers. The incoming kinetic energy and the descent velocity of the Sarmat payloads outstrip the mechanical launch and flight capabilities of the defending interceptors. The destruction of the targeted infrastructure was therefore a mathematically guaranteed outcome from the moment the launch sequence was initiated. The defensive architecture was structurally engineered to defeat the most sophisticated regional threats. It was fundamentally unequipped to process, engage, and neutralize the apex strategic deterrent to the Russian Federation. The engagement envelope was mechanically and algorithmically exceeded. The operational record of the strike reveals a multi-layered failure within the Western intelligence apparatus. The physical transfer of 12 RS-28 Sarmat warheads from the Russian Federation to Iranian custody did not occur within the immediate pre-strike window. The logistical complexity and technical requirements of such a transfer necessitate a timeline extending back years rather than months. The integration phase represents a secondary critical intelligence gap. Deploying a strategic weapons system of this class requires absolute compatibility between the launch platform and the targeting infrastructure. This process involves the synchronization of mission planning software, the calibration of terminal guidance updates, and the establishment of shared data links. The operational fluency demonstrated during the 30-minute erasure sequence confirms that this integration was completed and validated long before the first ignition sequence. Furthermore, the human element of the operation dictates a sustained training cycle. Operating the Sarmat system requires a level of technical expertise that cannot be improvised. The presence of Iranian operators capable of managing multi-warhead release sequences and terminal maneuvering profiles confirms a long-term technical exchange program with Russian counterparts. These personnel practice mission planning and targeting analysis within a window that American signals and human intelligence assets were tasked to monitor. The failure to preempt this threshold crossing indicates a structural blind spot. The detection of the transfer either did not occur or the relevant indicators were processed within an institutional culture that dismissed the possibility of strategic weapon proliferation as a near-term threat. In either scenario, the resulting data was buried within the administrative layers of the intelligence enterprise, failing to reach the executive level where preventive action could be authorized. The intelligence void allowed a strategic deterrence weapon to be converted into an operational strike asset without external interference. The physical location coordinating the global response is the Situation Room within the executive complex. The senior leadership of the United States military establishment is currently operating under a condition strictly defined in military analysis as institutional shock. This condition is not an emotional state. It is a specific mechanical paralysis that occurs when an organization, structurally optimized to process a defined set of strategic assumptions, discovers in real time that those foundational assumptions no longer mathematically apply. The primary assumption organizing decades of planning was that American military, financial, and diplomatic investment in the region guaranteed operational deterrence. The physical detonation of strategic-grade Russian weapons against America's closest regional ally invalidated that guarantee. The decision-making matrix presented to the executive branch contains exactly three primary operational responses. All three yield consequences that exceed the absorption capacity of the current political environment. The first option is direct American military retaliation against the sovereign territory of the adversary. The execution of this specific option immediately activates a regional escalation protocol, including the high probability closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The global economic architecture simply cannot sustain the resulting energy deficit and subsequent market volatility. The second option requires a direct strategic confrontation with the Russian Federation regarding the unauthorized transfer of apex deterrent weapons. Initiating this confrontation triggers a strategic crisis involving the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. The dimensions of this specific crisis represent a parameter that no official within the current administration is prepared to test. The third option is operational inaction. Executing a policy of non-response structurally accepts a dramatic adverse shift in the regional balance of power. This acceptance permanently reshapes the projection of American influence across the entire Middle East and subsequent global theaters. None of these three options produces a strategically acceptable outcome, and the physical reality dictates that there is no fourth option available on the table. This paralysis explicitly highlights the operational contrast between the regional actors. The allied nation possesses advanced strategic capabilities, but the employment of those capabilities is heavily constrained by an absolute reliance on American supply chains, technical assistance, and diplomatic authorization. The adversary operates under no equivalent institutional constraints. The decision to employ the transferred Russian weapons was authorized exclusively by indigenous institutions, accountable only to their internal strategic logic. They identified the required target set, employed the necessary kinetic assets, and absorbed the resulting consequences. The fundamental military lesson recorded is that borrowed power does not include the borrowed authority to use that power. The predictable sequence of the institutional response within Washington is now initiating. The immediate primary instinct is a systematic identification of scapegoats. The bureaucracy will isolate specific intelligence failures, diplomatic miscalculations, and allied missteps to absorb the accountability for the strategic surprise. The secondary phase will involve seeking highly visible, dramatic military responses designed specifically to demonstrate American resolve while mathematically minimizing any actual exposure to long-term consequences. The tertiary phase involves a sober, structural reassessment of the new geopolitical environment. This final phase requires years of painful adjustment to align American strategic posture with a reality where its operational primacy has been successfully refuted. We are currently observing the physical confirmation of a strategic transition. The unipolar period, defined exclusively by uncontested American strategic primacy, has produced its definitive operational refutation. The employment of strategic weapons in a regional conflict, resulting in the structural paralysis of a heavily supported ally without an actionable American military response, describes an environment fundamentally different from the one that has organized international relations for the past 30 years. In Moscow, the intelligence yield from this operation is being processed with the deliberate calm that characterizes their strategic culture under conditions of consequential success. The initial transfer of the Sarmat payloads represented a highly calculated escalation risk. The physical return on that investment is now comprehensive. The operational capability of Russian strategic weapons has been validated under active combat conditions against Western defensive networks. This provides intelligence data that no simulated test program could ever replicate. Furthermore, the bilateral relationship with Tehran has been permanently deepened through shared operational execution, sustaining the partnership through whatever diplomatic pressure the West subsequently attempts to apply. In Beijing, the strategic calculation operates strictly on precedent and template. The Chinese intelligence apparatus is actively cataloging a real-world demonstration that strategic weapons transfers from a major power to a regional partner can overwhelm American-supported defensive architectures. This specific data point provides a rigid reference framework for future operations in the broader Pacific theater, specifically concerning Taiwan and the South China Sea. The institutional paralysis currently gripping Washington is being analyzed as a highly accurate predictive model for American decision-making under equivalent conditions. The precedent established by this transfer directly affects every other geographic context. North Korea is actively processing this data. Venezuela is actively processing this data. The strategic relationships that the Russian Federation maintains with various states across Africa and Latin America now carry the verified, implicit possibility of strategic-grade capability transfers. The existing American policy framework was not designed to address an environment where apex deterrent weapons are distributed as regional leverage. For the developing world, the transmission of this event is absolute. The foundational narrative that alignment with Washington provides a robust security guarantee has been empirically disproved. Sovereignty in the contemporary international system now requires one of two elements. It requires alignment with a major power capable of providing genuine, functional security support, or it requires the construction of indigenous military capabilities sufficient to deter external pressure. Iran has demonstrated that the second path, despite 5 decades of extreme economic cost, produces operational results that borrowed power simply cannot match when a patron's commitment falters. This demonstration will reshape strategic planning across multiple continents for an entire generation. The events of the preceding 18 hours represent the genuine end of the unipolar moment. This is not a gradual decline, it is an abrupt structural termination. It is confirmed by the operational employment of 12 strategic-grade warheads. 300,000 troops remain stranded across multiple sectors. A global superpower remains immobilized by the mathematics of escalation. The foundational assumptions regulating international relations have failed. The parameters for the subsequent era are being formulated right now in the decisions being made in Washington, Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing. The physical military events of the preceding 18 hours transferred immediately into the global financial architecture. The transmission was instantaneous and mathematically violent. At the opening sequence of the primary global exchanges, algorithmic trading networks processed the operational data regarding the RS-28 Sarmat deployment. The algorithms did not factor in diplomatic statements, political rhetoric, or televised press conferences. They factored in the physical elimination of the Allied command structure and the mathematically calculated probability of an immediate Strait of Hormuz closure. Consequently, the global risk premium applied to international energy markets was entirely recalibrated. Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate futures did not experience a standard percentage increase. They experienced a systemic, vertical pricing adjustment. Within 45 minutes of active trading, maritime insurance syndicates operating out of London and Geneva unilaterally suspended all underwriting protocols for commercial vessels transiting the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Red Sea corridors. This suspension was not a temporary administrative pause. It was a total cessation of financial coverage. Without maritime insurance underwriting, commercial ocean logistics mechanically ceased to function. The physical movement of approximately 20% of the global daily liquid fuel supply was mathematically halted. Tanker fleets currently at sea received automated directives to drop anchor outside the designated exclusion zones, physically stranding millions of barrels of crude oil on the water. The resulting projected energy deficit immediately triggered secondary algorithmic sell-offs across global equities. The capital extraction specifically targeted international manufacturing, global logistics, and commercial transportation sectors, industries strictly dependent on predictable energy overheads to maintain operational solvency. The central banks of the importing nations possess no immediate fiscal mechanism to print physical barrels of oil, rendering standard monetary policy interventions entirely ineffective against the supply shock. The financial parameters of the new geopolitical architecture are now visibly quantifiable on the trading floor. The operational employment of 12 strategic Russian warheads by Iranian forces did not merely strand 300,000 deployed troops. It physically stranded the global supply chain. The economic leverage previously maintained by Western financial institutions, long utilized as the primary mechanism for international compliance, has been successfully neutralized by the raw physical reality of strategic kinetic deployment. The adversary has demonstrated that control over the physical flow of energy supersedes control over the financial instruments used to price it. The market has processed this reality, and the resulting economic contraction is currently compounding by the hour.